What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, December 7th, 2017. It's Pearl Harbor Day, and there are all kinds of commemorations going on down in Pearl Harbor outside that window. So if you hear aircraft flying low overhead, it's just part of the festivities, if you will, here. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. And we're going to start with a brief mention about what's going on in Southern California. The wildfires are just amazing. Now, the good news is today's winds are not quite as strong as the weather forecasters were saying they were going to be, but it's still a big problem. And these fires are now getting right into Los Angeles proper. They're burning through the hills, the area east of the 405 up to Bel Air is now a mandatory evacuation zone. Fires are burning around the J. Paul Getty Museum. So this is really, really serious stuff indeed. And you kind of have to wonder about, you know, why can't they bring in water bombers on this or something like that? Would seem to make a lot of sense. All right, let's get on to the international news here. The global condemnation continues for Donald Trump's announcement that they were going to recognize Israel, as Jerusalem, as Israel's capital, and eventually move the embassy there. And it's a very contentious issue. And you need to understand that every other country that has diplomatic relations with Israel has their embassy in Tel Aviv. So basically, the world is condemning what Trump has done. Of course, Netanyahu says it's great, it's historic, it's wonderful, it's the right thing to do. But he is one of very few voices that are out there. Now, obviously, Trump's move was welcomed by the American far right, the Christian Zionists, but most people are saying, no, it was not a good idea. Okay, the United Nations Security Council is going to meet in emergency session tomorrow. 8 different nations requested this emergency meeting over what Donald Trump has done. And what Donald Trump has done flies directly in the face of numerous United Nations resolutions, going all the way back to the founding of Israel, that said Jerusalem is a shared city. And the United Nations has repeatedly declared in resolutions that Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. Now, unfortunately, because the United States does have a veto over anything the Security Council does, nothing is likely to come out of it. But it is basically expressing the sentiment of all these other nations that this was not a good idea. Now, the State Department has issued a travel warning for Americans for pretty much the entire planet, saying if you are an American traveling overseas, that you need to just be very, very careful. Now, the State Department didn't specifically mention Israel, but it appears from the timing of the warning that that is their concern, that there is a lot of anger now directed at the United States of America and at Donald Trump, and if they can't reach Donald Trump, they're going to grab the nearest American that they can. So we now all have a bullseye painted on the back of our shirts or jackets, courtesy of the president. Now, the Palestinians have called for days of rage over this U.S. Jerusalem move. And by that, they mean protests, gatherings in the streets. Unfortunately, some violence has already broken out in several places around the world. So basically, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said Trump's decision is a flagrant aggression, and the decision is an uncalculated gamble that we will know no limit to the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim reaction. Muslims who are now, thanks to the globalist open borders agenda, now standing within easy reach of targets in Europe and the United States of America. Not a very smart thing to have done. Now, Palestinians have clashed with Israeli soldiers in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, and a lot of Palestinians have been wounded and arrested. So this thing, they're already talking about a new intifada. A whole new intifada, the end of any possibility of peace, the end of the two-state solution. And Abbas is out there saying the real effect of all of this is that the U.S. can no longer mediate Israel-Palestine talks, because up until now, the U.S. was at least trying to pretend to be an impartial, objective negotiator between the two countries. And Abbas is saying, basically from this point on, the United States representatives should just sit with the Israeli table. And so the U.S. has lost that political posture within the Middle East. Nobody's going to see them as an impartial negotiator, peacemaker. I'm still thinking we may see Vladimir Putin step on in. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, an Egyptian minister has come out with an interesting idea. He is saying that Arab nations should start opening their embassies in Palestine's East Jerusalem, and counter the U.S. effort by saying, well, okay, Palestine's capital is Jerusalem, if Israel's capital is going to be Jerusalem, but again, under the United Nations resolutions, they have to share the city. Of course, we know that's not what Israel wants. They want it all. Lebanon's Hezbollah has blasted Trump's decision as an outright aggression. Turkish organizations are launching wide-scale protests of the embassy move. This is not working out well at all. World leaders are slamming Trump over what they're calling a reckless stunt, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And the criticism has been denounced by the UN General Secretary and even our own, what we thought were our close allies. We're getting rebukes from Germany, France, and Great Britain, along with all the expected rebukes from the Muslim leaders. Now, the chairperson of the African Union Commission on the American has released a statement on the American decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel, and that is excoriating. It was a reckless thing to do. Prince Hassan of Jordan: Donald Trump's Jerusalem move plays politics with international law and our lives. People are concerned that this will be the start of a regional war. Iran is saying Trump's recognition of Jerusalem and moving the embassy to Jerusalem will spark another Palestinian intifada. That seems to be a common and growing sentiment out there as well. Now, interestingly enough, just a few days ago, the communities of Bethlehem, Beit Jalah, Beit Sahur lit up their Christmas trees. And now, because of Trump's decision, they've shut them all down. This is a protest. And this was a decision made by local officials whose leadership is majority Christian. So these are Christians who are protesting this decision by shutting off the Christmas tree lights. Now, down in Africa, in Mvezo, I hope I got that right, Chief Mandla Mandela has lambasted Donald Trump's decision and called it an act of perverse incitement and said Jerusalem will always remain the capital of Palestine. Even the Saudi royals are not on board with Trump on this one. They're saying the decision was irresponsible and that the U.S. has violated the peace process, and yes, they have. So overall, it is definitely not playing well on the world stage. All right, let's take a phone call. Bill in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you. Well, Israel, you know, Donald Trump has really showed all his cards now that he's playing, that he's just going to be a warmonger. He's showing that North Korea is pretty correct on, he's the one starting it, not North Korea.
Yes.
You know, Israel was formed, Mike, in 1947. Guess what came under attack in this country in 1948? School prayer and anything to do with any religious teachings in our public schools. Gee, that's funny how that worked out. And you know, Israel's cost us so much money and lives and everything else, and they do nothing. They never lose anybody. Boy, if they lose one Israeli or two, all the world's got to know about it. But you know, the other thing is they're always after Iran. Well, remember the Shah of Iran?
Yes.
He was the dictator. He was the dictator that kept his people under his thumb.
Yes.
And they'd had enough of it. And guess who was living like kings and queens in Iran? A large Jewish population. The citizens, natural citizens of Iran,
Yes.
had enough and threw them out, and they've been smarting over it ever since, and that's why they keep wanting going after Iran. And it just gets a little tiring, you know, and this sound, you know, there's a big arsenal here where I live, and I was going underneath the bridge that comes off the arsenal traffic, and I seen 3 flatbed semis carrying ambulances. That's what one of their big contracts is here in this locale. And so I don't know, you know, if this is, you're going to start seeing machinery going down the highway and ambulance and that, and Israel just going to sit back and watch us just go to town with it.
Well,
so, Mike, I'll let you get back to it. Well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, first of all, you need to understand that it was the Central Intelligence Agency that overthrew the legitimate government of Mohammad Mossadegh and installed the Shah of Iran. But there have been Jews living in Iran peacefully going back for quite a long time, and a huge increase in the Iranian Jewish population during World War II, and they've always been treated well there. But the reason Israel wants Iran smashed up is it's a regional political rival. And Israel wants to dominate the entire Middle East and eventually to own a large chunk of it, what's called Eretz Israel, or the Israel that's described in the Bible, reaching from the Nile to the Euphrates. And again, in the nuclear age, shaping your foreign policy based on the writings of some Bronze Age goat herders seems a little silly to me.
It is. And, you know, I'll leave you with this. For us to lose such a strong, stalwart friend of ours in the Middle East called Turkey,
yes,
is a big deal. I can't believe that Trump just completely turned his back on those people, and they are tough in the Middle East. And they was with us. This is just really upsetting the apple cart in so many different ways. It's not only Iran's going to be broke on pieces of the whole Middle East. You know, this all started before 1980, pre-1980. There was reasonable peace, you know, relative peace between Palestinians, Jews, and that. And you know, but boy, we have sure tore up Lebanon and all over there and everything just to keep the rich in this country wealthy and to break it up in 1,000 pieces so Israel can get a greater Israel. It really sickens me to see this happening. And Mike, I thank you for the time.
All right, well, thank you very much. We could conceivably see all of the Middle Eastern Arab Muslim nations unite together in the face of this. This is a slap in the face. It's an insult. I mean, even Saudi Arabia is not on board with what Trump did. And so, yeah, this is another sign of America's declining influence around the world, because Trump has just seriously strained, if not broken, our relationship with countries such as Turkey. And they're already talking about, you know, the Arab nations uniting with Palestine to come on in and say, this has gone on long enough. And it really, really has. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Hey, don't forget, Turkey's the second largest army in NATO, and they also control the Bosphorus Strait. So, you know, that's right there is like a game changer. And, you know, how is this in America's best interest doing this?
It
just stirred up like a hornet's nest.
Yeah, very clearly, this decision was not made in the best interest of America and the American people. It was made as a payback to Sheldon Adelson. Israel is already admitting that Netanyahu and his aides were lobbying Trump to do this. It was a very, very bad decision. And if there's one thing that we demand the President of the United States do, is consistently make good decisions that are based on what is best for the United States of America and the American people. This clearly did not fit into it. He's caused a huge amount of damage in our foreign relations. This is an even worse mess up than when Obama wrecked our relations with the Philippines over the treatment of drug criminals.
Mike, the vast majority of the world hates us, and half the country hates us. I mean, how is this helping anything in the world? You know, like, I mean, the only people who like us is the leaders we put in, the puppets like Poroshenko and stuff. Nobody else likes us in the world because we become aggressive. I mean, I don't understand this whole where this is headed. And then you get Nikki Haley saying, like, we might not go to the Olympics. You know, well, the Russians aren't going, most likely.
Yeah.
So if we're not going, gee, what's that going to do to the South Korean economy? What about all those corporate sponsors? You just wrecked South Korea without North Korea firing a shot.
It is insane. It is insane. And you're absolutely right about the impact, because if Russia is banned from going to the Olympics and the U.S. Doesn't go because they're concerned of a North Korean attack, it makes the games rather pointless to watch. And yeah, that everybody who's invested in it, whether it's the stadiums, the marketing deals, advertising budget, they're all going to lose big time. And we have seen nations in the past that have spent so much to host the Olympic Games. If it doesn't work out, they do suffer major economic harm. And you're right, Trump and Nikki Haley may have just done more damage to South Korea than Kim Jong-un ever could, short of a nuclear weapon.
Hey, Mike, did anybody ever throw shoes at Obama? Because I know they threw them at Bush, and they're throwing them at Trump's picture now. And, you know, that's the biggest insult in the Middle East, throwing shoes at somebody. So I don't know if Obama got shoes thrown at him.
Not that I'm aware of right now. Certainly in this country, with shoes costing as much as they do, I think it would be silly to throw your shoes anywhere, unless they're totally worn out and you throw them in the trash.
And one more thing, Mike, the Shanghai gold contracts are going to be starting soon, probably within this next couple of weeks or in January. So
yes.
Look forward to that, too. Thanks,
yeah,
Mike.
That might break the lock that the riggers have on the price of gold, because it should be a lot higher than it is. Everybody is saying that, and we understand that the reason gold is being kept down is to keep people in the savings accounts and the stock market, where the money junkies can play with your money. If you're buying gold, or for that matter silver, and you have it under your own control somewhere in your home, then the bankers can't get at it, and they hate that. They don't like the idea of you being in control of your own wealth. They think it's wrong. They think they should be in control of your wealth. They know what's best for you. You're such helpless little children and everything. Okay, Dustin, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and get on back to the news. Now, earlier today, Christopher Wray finally had his turn in the hot seat before congressional investigators. And interestingly enough, came out with this claim that he cannot turn over any materials related to that dodgy Russian dossier that was used to obtain the FISA warrant because it's all classified. That's the new excuse. Congress can't see it. It's classified. Well, what about the members of Congress who've got security clearances? So this is a classic stonewall that's going on, because it's coming out more and more that that dossier, which is complete fiction, was the sole reason the FISA court agreed to issue those surveillance warrants. And it gets dirtier and dirtier all the time. Article coming out of Investment Watch blog, actually this is from Natural News. The Flynn investigation is proving for once and for all that the FBI has been transformed into a Soviet-style secret police force. And of course, we knew that all the way back in the 1960s. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Get out your paper and pencil, kiddies, because I'm about to share an address with you. If you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, and we really, really need it. We're running right on the edge. And the cost of kibble for our support staff is going up in price. So anyway, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to donate that way, is 800-724-27 2719, extension 03. And folks, we wouldn't be asking if we didn't really need it. Nobody at RBN, nobody at whatreallyhappened.com, we're not getting rich doing this. We're not living the life of Riley. For those of you my age, you'll get that reference. So we understand that you're all just getting by because of the way the economy is being managed by the money junkies. But we do need you to stand with us at this time here. Now, over at the Justice Department, a top official has been demoted over suspicious contact with Fusion GPS. That's that discredited opposition research company that ginned up the Russian dossier. And the individual is going back to Director of Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Unit. But it's all starting to show this little network that seems to center on Peter Strzok, who played a key role in that dossier and its handling. And apparently, he played a key role in agreeing for the FBI to pay Christopher Steele $50,000 to try and find evidence to support the dossier's explosives claims, which he was never able to do. And even though the FBI was uncomfortable with the validity of what Steele had claimed, they still moved forward and used that document to obtain a FISA warrant. There is the big stink right there. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently during this morning's session with Ray testifying before congressional investigators, Representative Jim Jordan kind of pushed him on this issue of the anti-Trump dossier. And, of course, as we reported earlier in the show, Ray came on back and said, well, we can't tell you about how the dossier was used to obtain the FISA warrant because it's classified, without saying who classified it and why Congress can't look at it. But Jordan basically ended up saying that there needs to be another special counsel to be appointed to investigate how this warrant against Carter Page, former advisor to Donald Trump's campaign, came about. And Jordan said the only logical way to get to the answers to the American people is to appoint a second special counsel. And if the Attorney General is not going to do it, frankly, I don't think he should be the Attorney General. So the battle lines are being drawn up. And apparently this dossier, unproven and eventually discredited, was the backbone of the request for a FISA warrant. And apparently this Peter Strzok was in the middle of all of this. So bit by bit, it's coming on out. All right, let's take a couple of phone calls. Joe in Rhode Island, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. The Dome of the Rock, Mike, what effect would this have on the Dome of the Rock, the people that are controlling it right now? If you could even venture a guess as to who's controlling it, is it the Mohammedans or is it the Jewish Israelis?
It is the Muslims. There's a special Muslim council that has jurisdiction over the Temple Mount, and they have done an amazingly wonderful job, all things considered, of guaranteeing equal access to the holy site for all the involved religions. Of course, Israel, they want to take control of the Temple Mount, which is actually the remains of an old Roman fort, Fort Antonio. And if they do seize control of it, they've made no secret of the fact that they would tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third most holy site in Islam, and the Dome of the Rock, and just pave the way for the third, actually the fourth, temple of Israel. And the real irony there, just how silly all of this stuff is getting, is the actual location of the first temple is not on that mountain. It's over on Mount Moriah, which is very nearby to the southeast. And even Israeli archaeologists are saying, yeah, that's probably where it actually stood. What they're calling the remains of Herod's temple today is actually that old Roman fort. But yeah, and if Israel were to go on in there and bomb the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, yeah, that would really get a major jihad going all across that part of the world. It may even be happening anyway. Turkey is already saying they're going to be getting together with all the other nations in the region in the next 8 to 10 days to decide what they're all going to do about Jerusalem.
Okay, it's going to be an interesting next couple of months, Mike.
Interesting. I have other words I would apply to it.
We're seeing events that the entire world is in an upheaval over that little geographical location, that little piece of real estate.
It is. It's rather amazing. And again, I keep thinking back to Ridley Scott's movie, The Kingdom of Heaven. You know, at the very end, when Balian is negotiating the surrender of the city with Salahuddin. And Balian says, you know, if you try and take this city by force, we'll destroy it. We'll burn it to the ground. Everything that drives men mad, we'll destroy. And Salahuddin says, I wonder if that might not be a good thing. Or I'm paraphrasing loosely. But it was some of the best writing that was in that film. And I know people look at that movie and they think, oh, it's swords and battle and all the rest of it. But behind it is just an examination of exactly what you're saying. This little tiny piece of dirt has been promoted to such importance because of religious fever of all these different religions that people are willing to just be driven to war and mass bloodshed over this. And that piece of property has changed hands so many times throughout history.
And the mantra and the beat goes on with the motto of the global system, peace, peace, or I'll kill you.
Yes. All right, well, all right, Joe, we're going to let you go. Switch over to Fran in Washington State. Aloha, Fran. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Whose bright idea was it to plunk whatever that was that became Israel right in the middle of Palestine?
Well, that goes back to the Balfour Declaration, which was rather dubious because it wasn't exactly Great Britain's right or authority to start giving away other people's lands. But the Zionists have always wanted Israel because it's their holy land, it's their home. Believe it or not, in the years just before World War II really got underway, Hitler had a lot of support from Germany's Jews. And they were working on a deal where if Hitler won World War II, he was going to give them Madagascar, the entire place, which is a lot larger and a lot easier to farm than Palestine. But the Zionists wanted Palestine for religious reasons. And in fact, they blocked any effort to allow Jews to escape to any place else on earth other than Palestine to try and build up that whole issue. Get Tony in Puerto Rico into the gap before the next commercial break. Tony, what's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yesterday we mentioned about Jerusalem, and I have a question. The first international banking system was created by the Knights Templar, am I correct?
They created much of the modern practices of banking, yes.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, Mike.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to the news here, Senator Franken had his little speech saying he's resigning, but he hedged his bets and said that he'll actually leave the Senate a few weeks down the road. So maybe he's hoping for a last-minute Hail Mary save from disgrace. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take 3 more phone calls, and then we're going to close the phone lines because I really do have a tremendous amount of information to share with you. So let's go to Nathan in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Huge fan of the show. I've been listening to you for a long time, so I love the program. I call every now and then. Really quickly, I just wanted to say I'm a seminary graduate, so I have a degree in theology. And for anyone who thinks that, the modern-day Ashkenazis that, have moved to the land of Israel-Palestine, that they belong there or they should build another temple is completely unaware of the historical narrative of that entire Jerusalem area. You can't build a temple there because, like you stated, the temple is, That's not the original site. The original site was further away from what its current location is alleged to be. On top of that, for example, if the Ashkenazis wanted to, say, build a temple and follow the Old Testament narrative of how the temple services are conducted, it wouldn't even work, because you don't know who the descendants of Aaron are. You don't know who the descendants of Levi are, because they're not the actual descendants. And even if you have a last name Cohen, it doesn't mean you're a descendant of Aaron at all. It just means that you just happen to have that last name. And they wanted to maybe give you some sort of like priestly ranking, but it has no tangibility in reality. I don't know if you're aware of this, Mike, but on Mount Carmel, there actually exists today the Samaritans. Yes. And the Samaritans have never left. And they've done blood tests on the Samaritans, trying to link them with the the Jews of living in Israel today, saying that there's a blood relation. The Samaritans are distinctly different blood type. They're more related to the Palestinian blood type. Yes. And the Samaritans themselves can tell you exactly who their priest descendants of Aaron are and who the priest helpers are, the Levites. They know exactly who they are. The modern-day Jews who live there do not know, and therefore they can't build a temple. The Jewish faith, by its own definition, is null and void. And anyone who has a background in theology would understand that and grasp it, and there's no issue about it. Well, again, you make a good point. The Samaritans basically genetically are much closer to the Palestinians. The Palestinians have been living there since the time of Jesus. Now, according to the Bible, Jesus had brothers. He had cousins. He had nieces and nephews. He had extended family. And over the last 2,000 years, as the Palestinians have made their families and grown, probably all of them are carrying the bloodline of the original historical character on whom Jesus is based, although his name was actually Joshua. Yeshua, directly into English, is Joshua. Jesus is an artifact created by translating the Aramaic into Greek and then the Greek into Latin. So they messed up a bunch of stuff during that whole process. And maybe that's the reason the Israelis hate the Palestinians so much. It's the same reason the Catholics hated the Cathars, because the Cathars were the true inheritors of the Christian church. Anyway, listen, Nathan, thank you very much. We're going to take a station identification break. Come on back, make 2 more phone calls, and then we're going to close the lines because I got news to do. And we're going to start with Curtis in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I just wanted to, what Trump is doing is that in anti-eschatology, everything being accurate is a strong point in the faith of Christians. And what we see, I think that after World War II, when Israel came back, that seemed to be strong evidence. But then again, everything seems to be scripted. And Trump, to me, it's like he's following a script. That on one hand, he's kicking out, he's draining the swamp. He's getting rid of, or saying he's getting rid of all these.
He's saying it. He's saying it. I'm not seeing it.
Well, you know what? I think it's possible because he's getting rid of that one faction of black hats. But yet, at the same time, he's escalating a buildup of tension in North Korea, Ukraine, Iran, all these places, now the Middle East. So, what I'm thinking is this is what they call Israel can be seen as the little horn and Trump a proxy of Israel. And what they might be building up to is trying to get the masses to follow them by showing us that we're kicking out these bad guys. But they escalate tensions so high that they come up with that peace. And then when they say peace, and then sudden destruction. See what I mean? That's what I hate to say it, but that's what it's looking like. It might, what do you think?
I'm having a little trouble following your logic, but again, there is no question that what Trump did yesterday has inflamed the entire Middle East. And we still don't know what the repercussions are really going to be, especially when you've got Turkey saying that somewhere a little over a week from now, everybody's going to get together and decide what they're going to do, which implies that something is going to be done about Israel and Jerusalem. and it may be with all of these Arab Muslim nations forming an alliance with Palestine and coming on in and starting another war over that little patch of ground underneath Fort Antonio. And at that point, Israel will start to use their nuclear weapons. And we'll all say, see, we told you Israel did have nuclear weapons. And all that money that the American taxpayer was forced to give them was illegal under U.S. law. So we'll see what's going to happen. Anyway, Curtis, I'm going to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone lines. James in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Two things. I'll make it brief. First is that Trump may be taking a page from Matt Lauer's playbook. Reports are that he has had a button installed under his desk, but instead of locking the door, it opens a trap door in front of his desk. And I would be worried if I was Jared Kushner, because reports also state that he's had Ross Perot over to discuss what Jewish son-in-laws do for your presidency. Number two, Maxine Waters said that the threat to Guam by ballistic missiles is a red herring. She believes that North Korea will simply invade Guam and thereby, of course, capsizing it. So. Okay.
Well.
Okay. Well.
Valiant effort at humor.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We really do have to let you go. And the phone lines are closed until further notice, because I really do need to get back to the news. Now, interesting little article has just come on out. Apparently a search of the WikiLeaks archive has uncovered evidence that Huma Abedin also lied under oath. And apparently when she was being interviewed, apparently by Peter Strzok, she claimed that Cheryl Mills, not Huma Abedin. Cheryl Mills came on out and said that she was completely unaware that Hillary Clinton was using a private server until after Hillary Clinton left the State Department. And this was in 2016, she said this. But WikiLeaks has discovered an email that Cheryl Mills received and then forwarded back to herself so she could save it. And basically the email says right at the bottom, sent using the U.S. Department of State BlackBerry server. Now, the reason this is important is because the State Department itself does not really get into using what's called these virtual BlackBerry networks. Cheryl Mills did and Hillary Clinton did. But the U.S. Department of State doesn't really have a BlackBerry server itself. It was set up. And again, there are indications Imran Awan and his associates may have been involved in this as well. Now, again, behind the whole Hillary Clinton email server scandal, I have been asking a very significant question. Based on the prior events of 1994, the Chinagate scandal, in which then President Bill Clinton used his authority as president to authorize the sale of militarily sensitive technology to China, and at the same time Chinese money was funneled through Chinese American citizens into Bill Clinton's re-election campaign. It is reasonable to ask the question, was Hillary Clinton selling U.S. secrets to foreign parties using her weak email server to deliver the information and her charitable foundation to collect and launder the money? And then after that comes another question. Because of the Imran Awan scandal, investigators are now saying it appears there was a massive spy operation going on right inside the Capitol building. Spying on the representatives, spying on the senators. What is not being dealt with right now is who basically set that up, who the Amrans were working for. Was it an extension of Hillary Clinton's spy operation? And that's why this is getting really, really touchy. We're going to do a shout-out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, here's an interesting story, and this came out of Pop News Magazine, and it has to deal with the fact, and we all know that this happened. Remember when James Comey was handing out all of these immunity deals to all of Hillary Clinton's associates? in exchange for turning over their electronic devices. And then Hillary and her people got a couple of very strange concessions from the FBI. The first concession was that the FBI agreed they would not search any emails after January 31st, 2015. Now that's significant because that's when the story about the private server broke. And so any emails that would have proved an attempt to obstruct justice on that issue would have been on these devices after January 31st. But the FBI said, no, we're not going to look there. And the second concession was that the FBI agreed that once they had gone through the emails and other data on these devices, they were going to be destroyed so that nobody else could look at them. Can you say cover up? I knew you could. So we're starting to hear talk about an investigation into just how the FBI and the Department of Justice under Obama handled the email server investigation. And as we get deeper and deeper into it, we find that the FBI basically destroyed the evidence that the new investigators would need. Now, last year, Judicial Watch uncovered documents showing that when Huma Abedin was under oath, she testified that the secret private email system was all Hillary Clinton's idea. Remember when Hillary was trying to play dumb about computers? Oh, I don't know about computers. What do you mean wipe the drive? You mean with a dust cloth or something? The more I hear, the more I think that, yes, in point of fact, Hillary Clinton, while serving as United States Secretary of State, was running an espionage operation, selling the take to foreign interests in exchange for campaign donations for her run for the White House. Now, here's another interesting little story. This goes back to Harvey Weinstein, because when the Clintons were out there campaigning back in 2008, and Weinstein was out there throwing fundraisers and donating a lot of money and these flashy parties and everything, basically Bill and Hillary Clinton's team were warned repeatedly about Harvey Weinstein from Lena Dunham and Tina Brown, and basically said, you've got to know, Harvey's a rapist. It's going to come out, and you don't want to be associated with him when it does. And the Clintons ignored that, and they went on ahead. But they knew. They knew what this guy was all about. And they still said, okay, that's fine. I mean, I guess from Hillary's point of view, you know, what's the difference between Harvey Weinstein and what Bill was doing? She could live with it with Bill. She could live with it with Harvey. Another little story. This is out of the Huffington Post, and it talks about what Donna Brazile left out of the Democratic National Committee story. Now, as you know, Brazile's come on out with that book in which she's trying to say this is all what happened. And the one really juicy thing that came out of there was the idea that the Hillary Clinton campaign basically took control of the Democratic National Committee in August of 2015, when the DNC was hopelessly broke because Obama had left them in debt from his election and hadn't done a lot of fundraising on their behalf to clear the coffers. So Hillary came on in with a whole bunch of money, took on over and said, we're going to be calling the shots. The DNC is on an allowance and you will do what we say. That's Donna Brazile's story, and that was considered a shock. But apparently, it's come on out that months earlier, almost to the very beginning of 2015, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was then the DNC chair, asked for Clinton loyalists to come on in and run the party's election strategy. So Hillary and her people were running the DNC much earlier than Donna Brazile admitted. Now, Bloomberg News has had to correct their story. They came on out, we saw it earlier in the week, about how the Mueller investigation had subpoenaed Deutsche Bank records for President Trump and his family. And it was all over the news. The corporate media ran with it. And then Trump's attorneys came on out and said, no, there have been no such subpoenas to Deutsche Bank involving the Trump family. Well, Bloomberg had to back on up and redo the story and say that the subpoena is for bank records that pertain to people affiliated with Trump. Now, that's a big difference. It's still a fishing expedition that Mueller is on. But that was a big, huge mistake or a fabrication by Bloomberg trying to make it look like, yes, we've almost got him now. We're going to get Trump. They've been saying that for months now. There's going to be a smoking gun. We've got him now. We're going to get him to court. We're going to get him impeached, which they tried earlier in the week. That got shot down. Now, speaking of the Huffington Post, we need to be very careful where the line is between the corporate media and the independent media. And just because media is on the Internet doesn't mean they are not corporate. And according to a Tuesday report from The Outline, news outlets such as Forbes, Fast Company, and the Huffington Post take payments from corporations in exchange for positive coverage. Outline reporter John Christian claimed that brands have constructed elaborate payment schemes in exchange for popular news coverage in outlets like Mashable, Business Insider, and Entrepreneur. And people involved with the payoffs don't want to discuss them, obviously, but 4 contributing writers to prominent publications said that they personally accepted payments in exchange for weaving promotional references to brands into their work on those sites. And they've been doing it for years. So, another story, this one out of True Pundit, as long as we're talking about sexual harassment and Al Franken stepping down and Weinstein and all the rest of it. Apparently, when Robert Mueller and then James Comey were heads of the FBI, they were dealing with a surging and troubling amount of sexual misconduct complaints filed by violated female FBI agents. And basically, both Mueller and Comey just covered it all up. So there is a culture of corruption in the FBI. Or probably to be more accurate, the FBI is a culture of corruption. Certainly the way they were behaving to protect Hillary Clinton indicates that. Now, getting on over into the war zones here, Syrian forces are continuing to just clean out the last nooks and crannies of all the ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighters. There's an interesting article that came out of Zero Hedge where Donald Trump has reportedly ordered Saudi Arabia to immediately end their Yemen blockade. And this is a hard one to figure on out. Now, prior to the assassination of Yemen's former president, the word was out in the media that Saudi Arabia was tired. They were ready to quit. And they've since gone back in with heavy air bombardment. But now with Saudi Arabia angry at Donald Trump over this Jerusalem issue, they may be thinking about just pulling on out. And so Donald Trump may be issuing this statement to make it look like it was his idea that Saudi Arabia is going to quit and go home. That's my read on this. Remember, the goal here for the U.S. government is not necessarily to win a war, but not to have to admit they've lost one. That's why they're still keeping forces in Syria. That's why they're pouring more forces into Afghanistan. They may not be able to win these things. They just don't want to have to admit they've lost, because that will take the wind out of the sails of the ship of state, which these days happens to be a warship. Now, over in Israel, their cell phones have a special application that warns of rocket attacks. And the Siren app went on off and said rockets were being fired into Israel near the Gaza Strip. And the IDF said the red alert is enabled in Haf Ashkelon. And the IDF is claiming, reporting, that 2 missiles were launched from the Gaza Strip towards the state of Israel, but did not reach it. No talk of an interception. More likely they're bottle rockets that simply fell into the dirt on the wrong side of the fence. But now Israel has the justification to go back in and yet again bomb Gaza into the dust. Now, Israel also has launched their own surprise military drill. They did it just ahead of Trump's Jerusalem speech and after their most recent strikes in Syria. So maybe they wanted to be on the ready in case there really was a major flare-up following the announcement of Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Now, getting on over into Korea, and this one actually made the corporate media. North Korea is saying right now that it's no longer a matter of if, but of when. And North Korea is saying that U.S. constant warmongering makes a potential nuclear war inevitable. North Korea views the endless military drills on its borders and the repeated bellicose remarks by top officials as a means to provoke a nuclear war in the region. And it certainly sounds to me like they're right, because if you look over the last 16 years of war, we know who the aggressor is. The corporate media is always there to say, oh, well, this leader deserved it. He was a bad guy. He had nuclear weapons. He had sarin gas. We have a duty to go on in and protect those poor people, which we never actually do. We go on in and we bomb those poor people, and then we call it collateral damage. And now, of course, we have this intensifying situation in the Middle East, thanks to President Trump. So it does look like it is only a matter of time before we're well and truly into World War III. All we're missing is the big news-making event, the sinking of the Lusitania, the attack on Pearl Harbor, where everybody will wake up and say, oh, I guess all these little wars all over the planet, it's now one big giant world war. And obviously we should be very concerned over Christmas, because there's been a lot of propaganda from known propaganda outlets about how the Muslims are going to attack the Vatican. They're going to go after the Pope. Comes out of Russia today, and it's talking about this new technology of being able to edit genes, and it goes by the name Gene Drive. And basically, it's a gene editing technology that can alter global ecosystems by altering the life forms within them. And a lot of people have been wondering, what was this all about? And apparently, emails obtained through a Freedom of Information request by the ETC Group, a research and advocacy organization that focuses on ecological and agricultural issues. Apparently, the Pentagon is the top funder of this technology. So they're looking at gene editing as being weaponized. And this is going to make the Russians even more concerned about the fact that the U.S. military has been caught taking DNA samples from people all across Russia, trying to identify and codify their genotypes. So there looks like there is some project for a gene editing weapon. And all I can say is I hope they do a better job with that than they did with the F-35, because you have a system that edits genes and it makes a mistake, you have no idea what you're going to wind up with. You could have monsters, you could have Nietzsche's Superman, you could have an extinction level event. All right, let's talk about the economy a little bit. And from womensystems.com, an article about how U.S. corporations are earning record high profits, probably not from within this country, but they're paying record low taxes, and that's about to get worse under the new GOP tax plan. But apparently U.S. businesses have amassed overseas an estimated $2.4 trillion because they're not paying their fair share of taxes. And again, the idea is, the argument always comes down, tax the rich, tax the poor. Well, you know, the rich are more productive, they shouldn't have to pay the same percentage in taxes, versus the idea, well, the rich are rich, they should be helping to carry the cost of the nation. Now, my view is a very simple one, and I've stated this before. For an economy to function, for it to perpetuate, to operate smoothly and continuously, there must be currency, money, flowing at all levels of society and into all necessary sectors of investment. There must be some way that the accumulated wealth at the very top gets recycled back down to the bottom and made available to workers who will trade their skills and labor for that money and then pump it back into the economy and keep it going. Now, unfortunately, under our current fascistic system, which is rigged to simply trap all the money in the top 1/10 of 1%, that recycling mechanism is gone. And that's why the American people are rapidly being impoverished. and that entire economic pyramid is beginning to collapse. And for some strange reason, the wizards of Wall Street in Washington, D.C. fail to grasp a very simple concept. Before you can get money from the people, you have to create a situation in which those people can earn that money to begin with before they give it to you. It's a very simple concept. But maybe the ultra-rich are blinded by their own wealth. They're looking around and saying, well, things are good for me. They must be good for everybody else. It's not true. It's like Buddha when he was raised in the royal palace. He had to leave the palace and go on out and see what life was really like before he understood what was going wrong. That Buddha on the road moment. Now, poor Jeff Bezos, he's no longer a centibillionaire. And apparently, for 2 days, Jeff Bezos was worth $100 billion. It hit on Cyber Monday. Amazon shares soared. And then on Wednesday, when the stock came back down, his net worth fell back to $98 billion. My heart bleeds for his loss. Let's all feel bad for Jeff Bezos and his suffering. I'm sure that he's crying and rolling around on the floor even now. Interesting little story. Up in Vancouver, there was this employer who stole nearly $3 million in wages from 157 employees. His punishment was a fine of $500 by British Columbia's employment watchdog. By golly, that's going to teach him. That'll set an example and a deterrent not to cheat your own employees. $500, boy, that's painful. Now, Illinois just issued a series of bonds which have been rated AAA. That has got a lot of people scratching their head, because Illinois is nearly insolvent, but apparently they worked out some kind of corporate financing structure through Goldman Sachs that makes Illinois look really good. And before you all buy on into it, remember it was the similar deal that Goldman Sachs did with Greece under Papandreou that made Greece look a lot better than it really was. And then they got into some serious trouble. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. Now, last Saturday in the wee hours of the morning, the Senate finally passed the GOP tax bill, and it was notorious for being filled with all kinds of handwritten notes, some of which were denounced as being illegible, but what the heck, we're in a race, we've got to get this done, and they voted it through anyway. And it turns out that somebody goofed, and there is a mistake in that tax bill that is basically somewhere around the order of $300 billion in effect. And what it has to do is with what's called the corporate alternative minimum tax. Now, this is going to be a little tricky to follow, so I'll try and make it as clear as possible. The alternative minimum tax is a tax that kicks in order to prevent corporations from using deductions or other things to drive their tax bill all the way down to zero. And at one point, it was going to be repealed completely, and then at the last second, they put it back in. So far, so good. The problem is it was put back in at a 20% rate, which now matches the corporate tax rate. And that means that corporations are not going to be able to take advantage of a lot of the incentives that were put in there for things like bringing money back to the shores of the United States from other countries, enhanced spending into research and development. All those incentives are now effectively null and void, because if they go ahead and do them and their tax bill goes below the alternative minimum tax, it's just going to get shoved right back up to that 20%. Whoopsie! Is our face red? In the blueprint for the New America, I think I'm going to add a little instruction that no bill is going to be longer than 10 pages. Because when you get into these bills that are hundreds of pages long, you know there are going to be problems. Look at Obamacare. It's amazing. Now, online GameSmart Steam has stopped accepting Bitcoin payments. And apparently the service is concerned with Bitcoin's volatility, and they say it just makes it too hard to use. And they're saying historically the value of Bitcoin has been volatile, but the degree of volatility has become extreme, losing as much as 25% in value over a period of days. And that's a problem because when you're checking out on Steam, a customer will transfer X amount of Bitcoin for the cost of the game plus Y amount of Bitcoin to cover the transaction fee charged by the Bitcoin network. Now, the value of Bitcoin is only guaranteed for a certain period of time. So if the transaction doesn't complete within that window of time, then the amount of Bitcoin needed to cover the transaction can change. Now, if Bitcoin were holding steady, you might figure that it's going to go above as much as it's going to go below. And certainly at the moment, it's heading up. But again, it does look to me like it's being manipulated. And I'm getting a smell of tulips. And I know in responding to some of our callers, we did set up a Bitcoin link on my website. We've collected 1/100th of a Bitcoin, and thank you to those anonymous donors. I still have no idea what I could do with it, but it's there. There's another problem, though, because apparently NiceHash was a company that is the largest crypto mining exchange, and it is admitting it was hacked and $62 million in Bitcoin stolen and transferred away. $62 million. So there is another problem with the system, being all on computers, and computers being vulnerable, thanks to the NSA and the CIA's backdoors, that you could burn up a dozen computers mining a whole bunch of Bitcoins, and they could just simply not be there the next day, because they're in the control of that computer somewhere else. We need to go back to having a store of value, a monetary unit that you can have in your hand, in your pocket, under your control. A silver dollar. That's how this country started. If you have a silver dollar in your pocket, hackers can't get at it. And by the way, another reminder for those of you who are going out during this Christmas shopping season, you need to be very careful about your credit cards that have those RFID chips in them, because apparently hackers have reduced the size of their little sniffers, where they'll be walking past people in the mall just snarfing off credit card and banking details. It used to be a backpack, not anymore. Handheld device. So either get one of those wallets that is an RFI shield, or wrap them in tin foil. And as a common sense thing, you shouldn't have any more credit cards with you than you're actually going to use. Leave the rest at home in a drawer. You know, don't let your ego say, oh, look how thick my wallet is. I've got zigableams of credit cards out there. Every one of them is a point of vulnerability. You should have at most 2 credit cards. Unless you're running a business, that's really all you need. Don't make yourself a victim, because after all, it is the Christmas shoplifting season. Now, here's another little interesting story. This came out of the Daily Bell, and we all look to the government as the mediator in the transfer of property. That when we put our money into escrow and a deed is put into escrow and there's been a title search and everybody knows that, yes, that person actually owns this home or business, and the escrow will then swap everything and everybody goes home happy. But apparently, New York City has an issue with their system. They approved fraudulent papers which allowed a man to officially steal a woman's house. The forged deed was homemade, but the city government still processed it. They said stopping the fake deed from being processed would have been like finding a needle in a haystack. Hey, we're already overworked. It's not our fault. And apparently in New York, it's pretty easy to steal somebody's property with forged documents using the government system of verification. And it took years for this woman, Jennifer Marin, to finally get her home back and have this guy thrown in prison. The more they computerize our society, the more complex they make it, the more holes there are for people of bad will to come on in and cause mischief. Now, getting on down to immigration, apparently the Border Patrol made 310,000 arrests during the fiscal year that ended the end of September. That's actually a decline of 25% from the year earlier and the lowest since 1971. Now, despite the decline, border arrests increased every month since May, largely families and unaccompanied children, which is becoming an overused term because a lot of these people being called unaccompanied children so they can qualify for various special government programs, they're actually young adults here. Meanwhile, deportation arrests are soaring, and that's a good thing. And ICE, whose officers pick up people for deportation, made 143,000 arrests. That's an increase of 25% from a year earlier. So that's looking really good. Now, this issue of refugees in Europe is really getting out of hand. And story out of Express in Great Britain. Apparently, German pilots who were assigned to fly aircraft to take rejected asylum seekers back home refused. They simply said, I'm not taking the plane. I believe these people should be here. 200 flights were grounded because the pilots refused to fly these failed asylum seekers back home. Frankly, if I was the airline involved, I would fire those pilots. That's not their job to make these decisions about immigration and refugee status. Also in Germany, apparently reading out news about migrants is now seen as a crime in and of itself by the left. And apparently AfD politician Rainer Rahn of the Frankfurt City Council was sued for racial incitement by the left-wing faction leader of Die Linke, Martin Klein. And the reason for the lawsuit? Because Rahn had read 30 newspaper headlines out loud about the crimes and rapes that are being committed by the migrants in the city. Now, analysts are looking at this situation. They're looking at the German people's upset over the migrant issue. They're looking at the German people's upset over the abuses of the European Union. Merkel has been unable to form a coalition government. And analysts are saying that basically the days of Angela Merkel and popular German politics as opposed to populist German politics are clearly numbered. Angela Merkel will not regain her lost political might. This is from a German political analyst. Now, here's an example of the headlines which, if you read them out in Germany, you will be in serious, serious trouble. Apparently, last summer, in the Fatia area of the Swedish capital, 20 men gang-raped a woman, grabbed her, took her in a stairwell, and they were all migrants from Somalia and Iraq. And according to the victim, the migrants were discussing who would get to use her first, and apparently they literally had a line waiting for their turn. And they smashed the woman's head against the staircase, threatened her with a knife, and apparently when the police arrested them, the attackers said the entire thing was just a fun joke. Yeah, it was fun. That's all we were doing. We were just having fun. Polls are showing the majority of Europeans are favoring a total ban on Islamic immigration. There is understandably a concern over terrorism, but more and more it's because these migrants who are coming on in are refusing to assimilate and are instead demanding that the societies they've just come on into in Europe start to adopt Islamic law, Islamic mannerism, Islamic morals and behavior. Well, if the country you came from was all that great, why are you here in the first place? But it's been a tremendous amount of friction, and the majority of Europeans are now saying there should be a total ban. Meanwhile, the European Union remains committed to opening the borders to 75 million Turkish citizens as soon as possible. Now, the European Union is basically giving Turkish citizens visa-free travel anywhere in the European Union bloc, as well as handing 3 billion euros to migrants in the nation by next year. The EU is taking better care of the migrants than it is of the Europeans, and the Europeans are noticing it. Meanwhile, Ireland is surprised and disappointed over the stalled European Union and Great Britain talks. And Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar is saying he's disappointed that the British government could not reach a deal with the EU after Brexit talks on the Irish border fell short of an agreement. Now, the issue here is that Theresa May is between a rock and a hard place. The EU is demanding more from Great Britain, more divorce payment, more concessions, more agreements to sort of still have a tenuous link to the EU over and above that of two partnering nation states. Meanwhile, Theresa May's own backers in government are saying, we've already given them way too much. So she's between a rock and a hard place, and everybody is standing firm. Now, here is a very bizarre story, getting on back to the FBI. Former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, C. Frank Figliuzzi, wrote in a piece for NBC News that halting immigration is not who we are, and that Americans must adjust to terrorism. Terrorism, apparently, in Frank's view, is a small price to pay for the glories of the New World Order and the global government. And let's be honest, a constant stream of terrorists justifies increased funding for the FBI, doesn't it? I mean, if there was no terror, what would the FBI do besides harassing political demonstrators? Now, another article, this out of Russia Today. Germany's foreign minister is saying the world order is clearly changing. He's right on that. The role of the United States as a dominant world leader is fading. Now, he says it's under the Trump administration. On that, I do not agree. It's been fading for a long time, going on back to starting wars with lies 16 years ago. And, of course, the weakness of the U.S. dollar. And Germany's foreign minister is bemoaning the fact that the world is not turning to the European Union, and in particular Germany, as the new dominant superpower. Where have I heard that thinking before about Germany being the dominant power? 1918, I think, something like that, maybe. All right. Apparently, the Polish government put up a video on YouTube showing the disaster of the migrant problem, which is described as catastrophic. The property damage, the assaults. YouTube censored it. You are not supposed to know about any of that. Now, this next story I'm going to give you, I promise you it is not an April Fool's joke, especially because this is December 7th, the day that will live in infamy. Up in Sweden, and I got to tell you, Sweden, they're nuts up there. I used to think it was a nice country. Not anymore. Up in Sweden, there was an Eritrean migrant who shot a man in the leg while calling him a racist, for which he was arrested and charged. The court freed him because they said they could not prove that the Eritrean migrant knew the gun would fire a bullet when he pulled the trigger. I am not kidding you. That was the justification, that this guy didn't have an understanding that when you pull the trigger on the gun, it's going to go bang. This one is even sillier than that case over in San Francisco in terms of the extreme forgiveness of the migrants being shown by the courts in order to protect the open border agenda. That's what it's about. It's not about this migrant. It's not about the illegal immigrant. It's about not giving opponents to open borders political ammunition to stand up and say, look, this is not working. Now, San Diego is continuing their attempt to control this major hepatitis A outbreak, and apparently it emerged among the homeless population. And what they're doing is they're setting up this giant tent camp, and these are industrialized size tents that house a large number of people, and they're going to just have everybody living in there and treat them as, I guess, BSL 1. But the reason the outbreak is spreading is primarily from the fact of the homeless people having to relieve themselves on the streets of San Diego, from which it will then spread to other homeless and to even non-homeless. So they got a big problem down there. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're just now getting word, and I don't want to gloat here or anything, and it's not like he doesn't have other homes, but apparently Rupert Murdoch's home in California just fell victim to the wildfires out there. And so they really are out of control. And I do feel bad for the people who are losing their homes who do not have the means to easily replace them, because we know they're not going to get a lot of help from the federal government, just like we saw with Hurricane Katrina. Well, you know, force of nature, you know, these things happen. Should have had fire insurance. Now then, apparently there is a big stink going on between Ethiopia and Egypt. And apparently Addis Ababa is building a major dam on the Blue Nile River. And the concern by Egypt is that Ethiopia would then be in a position to control downstream Egypt's access to this vital resource and then place Egypt in a strategically vulnerable position. And Ethiopia has come on back saying they will not be thwarted in carrying out what they see as a nationally important development project. And it denied the rumors which claimed that Qatar was partially funding the dam. So there's a lot of tension over there. Every time you build a dam, it's going to affect what's happening both in the immediate upstream area of the dam and certainly downstream. And that can become an issue between countries. Egypt is dependent on that Nile. It's a vital resource. It's not just some little stream that's being inconvenienced. It's a major issue. And if Egypt and Ethiopia were to come to hostilities, then as much as the dam was able to hold, they could shut off the flow downstream. Remember during World War II, there was a special squad of aircraft called the Dam Busters that went on in, and that was their target. They would destroy dams in Germany, which were also, of course, electrical power generating stations. Now, here's a story, and this is coming out of Common Core. Apparently, the state of California is now being sued because so few of their public school children can read. And apparently, a survey at one elementary school in California, 96% of the students were not proficient in either English or math. And it's a reminder, the more the federal government gets involved in education, the worse it seems to get. At one time, the United States had the greatest system of public education on the entire planet, and I'm lucky that I was born in an age where that was still in existence. We've heard about the dumbing down of America, Common Core, and it's one of the reasons why I predict that corporations that do get financial gain from the new tax plan, they'll invest it in other countries with more skilled labor pools. Who's going to be able to build any kind of a manufacturing business or high technology business when the workers coming through the door can't handle basic math or even speak English properly? We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to open the phone lines, and we'll be back for hour number 3. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. And getting into some political correctness issues, which is really getting absurd here. Not too long ago at Texas State University, there was a student journalist, Rudy Martinez, who wrote an article saying that the White Death will mean liberation for us all, and called White DNA an abomination. And the college paper finally got around to firing him for what is clearly a very racist piece of writing. And you need to understand, racism in any direction is wrong. You don't end racism by being racist in reverse. You just build up the anger and the angst. Now, apparently over at Notre Dame, there is a movement there to remove the racist artwork of murals showing Christopher Columbus because of the way he exploited the New World and traded in slaves. But again, it's like these people who want to diss Thomas Jefferson for owning slaves. We cannot judge figures who are long dead and gone in history by the standards we hold today. We have to judge them by the standards that were in effect at the time they were alive. When Thomas Jefferson was alive, slavery was legal and accepted. We understand today it's wrong, and if we found somebody today that was owning slaves, we would be justified in condemning them. But we really do not have a right to try and condemn people long in the past because they had a different set of values than we do. That's being very intolerant. Now, here's a classic case of the snowflakes eating their own. Apparently at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, the university administrator has slammed their LGBTQ center for being too white. So you have this center that is supposed to be all-inclusive to all these people who don't really have a clear idea of what gender they are, or whether they even have one. And now they're being criticized because they don't have enough people of color in there. Well, if you go from the idea that these issues of gender are genetically mediated, maybe there's something going on there. Maybe blacks are less likely to be in these categories, or Hispanics are less likely. But it is rather interesting that in the name of tolerance and inclusiveness, they get criticized for being too white. The hypocrisy is stunning there. Now, here's another good one. This is out of Pennsylvania State University, and this sociology professor, Ann Delisio Parson, writing in the Journal of Feminist Geography, came on out with this idea that eating meat perpetuates hegemonic masculinity, and that masculinity implies an imperative to eat meat. Now, this is just getting silly. And I have two concerns with this. First of all, what makes geography either masculine or feminist? And second of all, the instinct to eat meat seems to cross all genders and all races. Is she just striving for tenure, or what's going on? Now, we've all seen the commercials on TV for Pandora. They're this jewelry brand, and they have sort of this the modular jewelry where you'll get a bracelet or a necklace and then you buy these individual little charms which represent significant events in your life. And there's nothing new with that. Charm bracelets were around when I was a kid. But these are very nice. It's sort of charm bracelets upscale. But apparently they had an advertisement which asked whether women would rather be given an apron or a bracelet for Christmas. And this just triggered the feminists saying, this is sexist. How could you do it? And apparently a variation of the ad was an iron, pajamas, an apron, or a Pandora bracelet. What do you think would make her happy? And they're saying, you're being sexist. And I don't think that's being sexist at all. And any man who doesn't already know the answer to that question does not understand their lady love. Now, Claire and I have been together for a long time. We just celebrated our 23rd anniversary. And over the course of the years, I have given Claire an iron, an apron. It was a nice one from Warner Brothers. It's got the characters embroidered on there. Pajamas and jewelry. And I can tell you just in a very objective way that the response to the jewelry was definitely much more intense. So, guys, if you haven't done your Christmas shopping yet, a little bit of guidance from me. But we seem to be in this area where these liberal snowflake groups are so desperate to keep themselves in the news that they're becoming caricatures of themselves. Apparently over at Facebook, there was a group of feminists who were doing posts that were all labeled, "Men are scum." Facebook suspended them, and the feminists are now screaming that they're being oppressed and censored and so forth. And maybe the censorship is a valid, legitimate issue. But again, you're not going to cure sexism by being sexist in reverse. Where has people's common sense gotten to over these last couple of decades? The cure to an evil is not more evil. The cure to racism is to stand up and say, I'm not going to be racist anymore, and you will not be racist against me. I'll not be sexist toward you, you will not be sexist toward me. That's how you calm this all down. But this idea of it's my turn now, You know, I come from the slave people and you're the master people, and now it's my turn to be the master and yours to be the slave. That's not going to solve any problems. That's just going to increase the friction. And again, a little bit of a reminder, no black person alive today has ever been a slave, other than that we are all, black and white, green, brown, peach, taupe, mauve, slaves to that 1040 form. And no white person alive today has ever been a slave holder. Even at the height of the antebellum period, only 1.5% of those southern plantation people owned slaves. Some of them were black themselves. They weren't all white. And the first slaves in this country were white as well. They were Irish. And the blacks like to go around and say, well, all of your ancestors were slave owners. No, mine ran a station on the Underground Railroad. And we're going to switch over to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Yeah, it's just not the right kind of show for that topic, but there's a lot of people that agree with you. Anyways, I've been listening faithfully every day, and I have a list of about 50 points. So maybe I can get to one or two of them. You were mentioning before about the cluster bombs, how
Hello?
I'm sorry.
We've only got about a minute left.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. So, okay, sorry, changing topic here. When the Nazis were rounding up the Jews, now that we look back, a lot of us think, well, maybe they should have put up a fight at some point. It's a common thought. And I wonder what the parallel is today. Like, are we going to look back and think, oh, we should have been putting up a fight? And I wonder where that line is. Like, did we already pass that line, or is that line still coming? You know, it's an interesting question.
Okay, well, real quick, because we're almost at the commercial break. First of all, the Nazis were rounding up a lot of people, not just the Jews. They were rounding up the gays, the mentally ill, and the gypsies. And second of all, the Jews did fight back in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. All right, so Mateus, we're going to let you go. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we take this next phone call here, this story was just sent to me by one of our readers. And this is a report from back in September of 2016. And apparently a hacking group was able to get into the WADA database, the World Anti-Doping Association, the one that's always being wagged to ban Russia and everything, and discovered proof that U.S. athletes were using doping during the Rio 2016 Games. So, at this point, as far as I'm concerned, the Olympics are pretty thoroughly discredited, along with being over-politicized. Now, as you know, everyone's been talking lately about the opiate crisis, or opioid crisis here in the United States of America. And we're not talking about the guy on the corner selling little balloons of white powder. We're talking about opium products being prescribed by doctors and dispensed by pharmacies in huge, huge amounts. And Oklahoma has finally had enough, and they are basically suing the industry as a whole, because these doctors are profiting from the visits to get new prescriptions. The pharmacies are profiting selling the opioids. The pharmaceutical corporations are profiting by making the opioids. Everybody's really happy. But the problem is that the social costs of this are all falling onto the state budgets. And so Oklahoma is sued. The lawsuit's moving forward. And they're saying basically through decades of fraudulent marketing campaigns to doctors and consumers, these companies have been the driving force in the deadliest drug epidemic in U.S. history, an epidemic that claimed more than 64,000 lives last year alone. Oklahoma continues to suffer greatly because of it. In the last 3 years, nearly 3,000 Oklahomans have died from overdoses, and more than 1,300 newborns have tested positive for substance exposure. The opioid crisis has created a generation of addicts who continue to struggle on a daily basis. These companies put profits over people, and we intend to hold them accountable. Good start. But that's true of the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. It's all about profits. whether it's the opioids or the vaccines. And by the way, they're saying this year's vaccine, flu vaccine, is turning out to be just as ineffective as years past. And remember, about a month ago, we ran this story. They discovered that the process by which the flu vaccines are being manufactured is altering the flu virus because they culture it in chicken eggs. And the virus will mutate to a form that infects chickens. And so you're getting the wrong vaccine. You're being vaccinated against a flu that is going to go after chickens. And you're not a chicken. Meanwhile, the human flu, the human variant of that virus, has no problem making you ill. Now, down in Australia, they're having major problems with their internet. And apparently, an undersea internet cable that links Australia with Asia has been cut just 6 weeks after the last time it was repaired. Now, this is a 39,000-kilometer CME-W3 cable linking Perth and Singapore. And last time it broke, it suffered multiple cuts in August. And it took 50 days to repair it. Now, there have been these very interesting incidents of cables being cut, and they're not saying what's cutting them. Is somebody trying to tap into the cable and they're botching the job? The U.S. used to use submarines to try and tap into undersea cables around Russia, the Soviet Union, rather. Is somebody just, for no reason at all, dragging large pointy things across the bottom of the ocean there? Or is somebody getting ready to launch a plan to literally shut off the entire internet in advance of some great world-changing event? But they're going to try and reroute Australia through somewhere else. And I hope they don't go through here because our internet service is still abysmal here. Now, apparently there is a data slurping keyboard app, and it's made a huge mistake with the user data. We seem to hear this over and over and over again. And apparently it's another open database left online. It's not only sloppy security, but it revealed just how much data apps are collecting on you. And in this case, it found out that data was being collected by this predictive keyboard application called AI Type. More about that when we come back from these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show there, and sorry about the cough during the bump music there. I had my master gain up here. So we're talking about computers, and we're talking about this predictive keyboard application, AI Type. And it has 31 million users. And the idea is that it's sort of a more beefed up version of the little typing assistants you see on the smartphones, where it learns about you, and as you type, it starts predicting what you're going to say next, which sounds like a really useful thing to do. Unfortunately, it is downloading information from your phone, including your name, your email address, your location, your IMSI and IMEI numbers, IP address, phone specs, operating system details, links to your social media profiles, and photos. It also slurped 373 million names and phone numbers from the contacts of over 6 million users. And then they went and they put it up on a publicly accessible database. Times I think about going back to just using 2 Dixie cups and a waxed string to communicate. 90% of my calls on my cell phone are my wife anyway. Now, if you're like me, you've probably been very curious about these so-called home DNA tests like Ancestry.com and 23andMe. And you may be tempted to try them. They're a little pricey. Apparently National Geographic has one as well, but the focus here is Ancestry.com and 23andMe. And apparently it is coming on out, they're not very accurate. Apparently Inside Edition had a set of triplets, identical triplets, send in their spit-on swabs to Ancestry.com and 23andMe, and they got wildly different results from both services. neither gave each triplet the same ancestry results. Now, it may very well be that they're just sampling for too few genetic markers, and their computer program just says, oh, well, we'll just make something up out of it. But apparently concern was raised over the fact that 23andMe, when you get back to your report, and it's saying you're this percentage of Irish and this percentage whatever, and then they'll get on down and they'll say the various African subgroups less than 1%. And people are, especially for people who are unfortunately racially hypersensitive, they're saying, what do you mean? I actually have black ancestry? And all these companies will say is, well, it's less than 1%. They won't say it's 0, which would be the honest thing to do. But I had been toying with the idea as a Christmas present of, getting one of these kits or two of these kits. But based on what Inside Edition found, it's almost bordering on being a scam. Plus, of course, as it's recently come on out, the police can go to these companies and get samples of your DNA without a warrant. So, good reason to keep your spit in your own mouth. Here. Now, speaking of pilots, which I mentioned a little while ago, apparently over in New Jersey, they're becoming very concerned about drones. Little tiny drones. We've all seen them. They're the hot item for Christmas, and they are a lot of fun. But apparently there have been some incidences where drones have caused damage, and it turns out the guy or gal flying the drone is operating under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And so New Jersey is actually getting ready to pass a law on drunk droning, which, makes sense to me. It really does. But it does seem kind of absurd and silly. But the drones themselves, they're actually a lot of fun. As long as you understand there's a correct way to have fun with them, like aerial shots without needing a camera cane, and there are things you shouldn't do with them, like peek into the neighbor's windows. That's a tacky no-no. Now, apparently, a massive security flaw has been found in hundreds of apps from major banks, including HSBC and NatWest, that left 10 million accounts vulnerable to hackers. And apparently researchers tested this new tool on these 400 apps and found that they had this severe vulnerability that would have given hackers your username and password, at which point they could log on to the computer and transfer your money anywhere that they wanted. Now, the banks have been informed of the flaw, and the report is they're removing it, or it has been removed. Basically, I think, again, close the point of vulnerability. Having an online banking system is great to check if checks have cleared, deposits have come on in, but don't link that to anywhere else. Don't have that enabled. That way, if somebody does break into your computerized banking interface, all they can do is see how much cash you have in your account, which in my case is laughably low, but they won't be able to do anything with it. Now, Google, along with all the things they do that we don't agree with, is apparently investing a lot of money in the next generation of computers and really pushing this artificial intelligence. And they have a new system called DeepMind, and they programmed it to learn chess. Not play chess, learn it. This algorithm is able to self-teach. It learns from scratch. The only thing it was programmed with initially was the rules of chess. And it was set to develop chess strategies simply from playing games against itself. And in the space of 4 hours, apparently duplicated all of the great chess games from the history of the game. And now it's coming up with new strategies, and the grandmasters are poring over it and saying, wow, that's really, really good. I used to love to play chess until I kept losing all the time to my iPhone, and then I quit because I won't accept such uppity behavior from my appliances. So here. Now, story out of ZDNet. Apparently, the United States government is taking the position that it does not need the FISA court's approval to ask for encryption backdoors. And they're saying basically the U.S. government has a right without a FISA warrant to ask tech companies to put backdoors in their encryption, which of course is why I wrote my article, Rivero Challenges the NSA. And apparently the government made this position back in July in response to questions posed by Senator Ron Wyden, but apparently it was only made public this weekend because they thought people might be a little bit upset, and yes, we are.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.